right, thank you. We're about to begin. I just want to say a few things before we start. If you have a handheld and you do Twitter updates and Facebooks, if you haven't done them tonight, I'd like to encourage you to do that to kind of help spread the word about what our candidates are saying. In the interest of time, the candidates have agreed to limit responses and get rid of the rebuttal time. Responses are going to be 1 minute long, no rebuttal, and that will help us to get more of the audience questions asked. There's no guarantee that we can get to all of them. And then I think what will also help us to save time is if we can, we appreciate the applause. If we can maybe refrain from applauding after each response, I think that'll help us get through more questions. I think we started off with you on the last question, so we'll start off with Mr. Case for this next question. Hawaii has the largest number of endangered species in the United States, yet often federal funding is determined not by need, but by formulas based on land acreage and population. How would you address this discrepancy?
First of all, my record on environmental issues in Congress was 100%, or very close to 100%, as rated by most of the prime environmental organizations. So I've gone down the road on this. I want to answer slightly differently because I don't think that the answer to protecting our endangered species necessarily lies in straight funding, although I think funding is very important. The answer lies in prevention. The answer lies in preventing species from coming in here that are going to take after our endangered species, and I only have to offer the mongoose, the wasp, and a whole range of other bees and other stuff that have destroyed our species. When I was in Congress, I put together, in conjunction with the State Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, a bill which basically said that we were going to apply the same standards to materials coming in from out of state as California asks us to apply when we go up to California to protect their endangered species. And that's unfinished business, and I want to go back to that unfinished business.
I think the issue here is really the fact that we do have invasive species in Hawaii, and how are we going to combat that. And it is true, if we don't get fair funding, and I think what we all know is Hawaii is viewed differently in many pieces of legislation. And I believe the way that we're going to have to do this in Congress is to continue that separate kind of definition for Hawaii so that Hawaii can get more of the funding to cover the invasive species that we have to battle. And there's just no other way to do it other than to get more funding. Maybe we'll be able to do something with more kind of matching funds or something along those lines, but we do need more funding because we are losing that battle on the invasive species.
For me, any next representative to represent the state of Hawaii has to be very cognizant and has to work very aggressively to prevent further invasion of non-native species into Hawaii. For myself personally, one of my more interesting experiences was serving in the Army Reserve, which sent me to Guam, which nominally is on the same latitude as the state of Hawaii, meaning its weather is nominally very similar to Hawaii. But to any of you who have ever been to Guam, aside from the fact that it doesn't have any trade winds, you will look around, it has no birds and it has no trees. Why? Because of the invasion of the brown tree snake. We have to be very conscious that what had happened in Guam should never ever happen here in Hawaii. And that's why the federal government has an important role, not just in terms of combating what is here, but having a very aggressive role with the Department of Homeland Security and the United States military to make sure that our international and our interstate commerce between Hawaii and the rest of the world protects our native species from further invasion.
This next question is a Social Security question. As a 70-plus senior, secure retirement depends in part on Social Security, along with my savings and a small pension. Solvency of Social Security is an issue. Where is fixing Social Security on your priority list?
Social Security is very high on my priority list, and that is for that specific reason. When you look at the kupuna and you look at some people, that Social Security is the only source of retirement income that they can rely on, and Medicare is the primary source of medical benefits that you have for those who are retired. It's got to be fixed. It's got to be made solvent. But you cannot fix it or make it solvent by, for some reason, changing it and then jeopardizing or limiting the amount that a person can receive within their lifetime. And that is the difference between what we would call a plan, that is sort of defined contribution in nature versus defined benefit. You cannot just have a person limited to X amount of dollars in their lifetime. And that is where some of the reform that's being proposed in Social Security is moving, like an annuity plan. We can't do that. We must take care of the kapuna who have come to rely on Social Security as their only source of livelihood.
Because I believe the federal budget deficit and our national debt is one of the most compelling issues the United States Congress must tackle and must tackle immediately, solvency of Social Security is extremely important to me. Let's be clear that over the short term, solvency of Social Security is probably there. But for my generation, or more importantly, when I look at my children and question whether or not my children might one day have Social Security, that is a far more troubling question. I think over the long term, entitlement reform is something that the United States Congress must tackle, and that's why this is something that I do support the President on. The President has suggested a bipartisan entitlement reform commission. This is a good idea, and I think both sides of the aisle should work cooperatively to find a way to address this.
This is one of the top 5 challenges and cases over the next 10 or 20 years, is to save Social Security. Basic problem, expenses are exceeding revenues. Until recently, revenues exceeded expenses, but now we're at the point where expenses exceed revenues. So things have come home to roost because we have failed to deal with the necessary adjustments on both the revenue and the expense side that are going to be needed. And these are hard questions, they're controversial. Charles, for example, supported the privatization of Social Security some years ago, and that was put forward by President Bush. I think that would have been a disaster. What is really required is to go straight at the balancing of Social Security, which is really a mini budgetary exercise. And hey, let's not just pretend it's about numbers, because millions and millions of our seniors depend on Social Security for their very livelihood. So we have to reform it. I agree with Charles. Entitlement reform is one of our principal challenges.
The next question is, public education is the most important tool for keeping American democracy alive and well for generations to come. What needs to be done to improve public education?